In the UK, a group of angry MPs have launched a debate in Parliament today, demanding for the release of the long-awaited report into the Iraq War Chilcot inquiry. They are concerned about a possible stitch-up by parties to delay its publication till after general elections. Yusra Makti has more.
The long wait for the publication of an inquiry into the Iraq War is frustrating some MPs in the UK.
Thank you.
The main demand is for its release before the upcoming general elections. Today, a cross-party group of MPs arranged a parliamentary debate, hoping to put more pressure on the panel of investigators to publish the findings of the Chilcot inquiry. Public hearings were completed back in 2011, and a draft of the final report was also finished 5 months ago, but the report's publication is still on hold. A former Conservative MP who is leading today's parliamentary debate says the failure to publish the report, costing taxpayers millions, is utterly unacceptable, adding that the suggestion that the report will be delayed until after elections, if it's not ready to be published by the end of February, further damages the inquiry's credibility and undermines the final report. But fears of a possible stitch-up to delay publication emerged only recently. It was when British Prime Minister David Cameron sought to distance himself, contradicting his pledge last year that the inquiry would be published by Christmas 2014. In Parliament last week, he reiterated it was out of his control.
But nonetheless, this is not within my power to grant the publication of this report. I would love this report to have come out already, and indeed, he and I voted together against the last Labour government over and over again, saying, please, can you get on and set up the independent inquiry that's needed? And if they'd got on and set up the independent inquiry, it would have been published, debated and dealt with by now.
Prompting many angry MPs to question who exactly is blocking the release of the inquiry.
Since it is absolutely well known by the cognoscenti that the report was completed many months ago, who is it, if the Prime Minister is helpless on this subject, who is blocking it? Is it the Secretary of the Cabinet? Is it Sir John Chilcot? Or is it the White House?
The government insists that it's all up to the man chairing it, Sir John Chilcot, who wants to give more time for those criticised in the report to respond. MPs who are pushing for the debate fear that both Labour and Tory parties are pushing for the delay until after elections. Since they were both supporters of the Iraq War, the publication of the inquiry could be damaging for their election campaigns. The group of MPs have given the end of February as the deadline for the publication. For them, it's important that the questions regarding the inquiry are addressed and answered before the elections, a chance for the British public to build trust for the party they will be voting for.
Now, joining us to discuss this issue is political commentator Hani Ali. Now, we've heard the excuses, but what, in your opinion, is the real reason for the delay in the publication of this inquiry?
Well, Sir John Chilcot, who is heading this inquiry, was also a member of the committee of the Butler Review, which happened much earlier when they were reviewing the evidence about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Now, that review took 5 months, looked at the evidence, took 5 months, and he was a member of that review, and they reached a conclusion, and it was it. This report, or this inquiry, has taken 5 years and almost 8 months, and it's not over yet. And as you have, as you have had in your report, clearly there is someone who's blocking the publication of that report. So the simple question is, who would benefit, or who, on the other hand, would be harmed if this report was to go public? And in this case, very clearly, I think the government will not be in a very good position, purely because the Conservatives did support the war on Iraq, which ended up to be a war that everybody agreed to be an illegal war that had no basis, or at least the intelligence that they used was completely baseless. So yes, and the fact that we are talking about it was meant to be published by end of 2014, it didn't. They're giving him another deadline by end of February, and there are already
But Hani, is that realistic? You're mentioning the end of February as they have. Is that realistic for them to actually have it available by that time?
I think they just, it sounds like these are just times and dates that are being presented so that it calms the anger to say that, you know what, it is going to be published. And when we get to kind of towards the end of February, then they will say, well, you know what, it's not going to be published in February, maybe another 2 months, maybe another 3 months. But the key thing is very obvious that the delay seems to be quite clearly connected to the elections.
Now we know that they've mentioned the end of February, as you've said, and they've also said that if it's not published by the end of February, then it won't be published before the elections. Now, what effect will the inquiry have on election prospects for both parties? Obviously, they're both very scared of something.
The concern here is not so much what they're scared of, but the concern here is that this is meant to be a non-partisan, impartial, independent inquiry into a decision that the government has taken. Now, if we hear about when it's going to be published, how it's going to be published, which of course they've also discussed and said that some of the communication between Tony Blair and George W. Bush at the time is not going to be published as they are. So when we hear about when it's going to be published and how it's going to be published, and this kind of interference just suggests that this is really, it raises lots of questions, whether this is an independent, impartial, truly objective inquiry, or this is just a simple political spin of what had happened almost 11 years ago.
Now, you've mentioned two key words there, independent and impartial. Now, we know that there have been some criticisms that have been raised in the report, and they're giving others time to respond to that. But also, I mean, in regards to Tony Blair now, and as far as he's concerned, do you think that we will see justice done?
Well, I think Tony Blair decided to go for a war that the people didn't want it. The people of Iraq did not ask for it. Let's be clear about it. Saddam was a brutal, violent dictator who was pretty much supported for a very long time by the same people who tried to topple him, or who indeed toppled him, which are the West. But the key thing here, Saddam had to go, but by no means this is the way that the Iraqis wanted it to happen. The Iraqis didn't want it. The British people didn't want it. Probably 600,000 people came out on the streets before the war, days before the war, in London to say that we didn't want it. The Parliament did not vote for it. The government did not support Tony Blair on his decision, and it pretty much was at the end of the day, it was a solo act or a duo act by Tony Blair and George W. Bush. So the key thing here is this was a war.
Hani Ali, I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there. That's all we have time for. Hani Ali, political commentator, thank you very much for joining us today.